the finest wines, the strongest security. What do these things have in common? It's something called blockchain, and it's rewriting the foundation of information technology. Someday it might be the cornerstone of human identity, but we're just at the beginning of this brave new world.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness future proof.
Your host here, Eric Kavanagh. And we got an all-star cast for you today, folks, on a very timely topic, I must say. We're going to talk about blockchain today. We have several experts joining us on the call. It's going to be really fun. We had a great pre-call already. So we'll be talking to Sean Brem of CrowdPoint Technologies, Oliver Oram of Chainvine, and Mance Harmon of Hedera Hashgraph. But first of all, just a couple of words about blockchain. Of course, blockchain became famous because it is the technology that underpins Bitcoin. And what is blockchain? Basically, it's a distributed ledger. That's what it boils down to. It's a ledger that has many different nodes. And with blockchain in particular, you want every transaction to ultimately persist on every single node. So if any node goes down, just go to the next node. There's some very, very intense cryptography that goes into creating the blockchain and managing Bitcoin as an entity. And of course, it's always fun to watch as the traditional financial world mocks Bitcoin. You saw it just took a huge dive. It went from 50,000 plus to about 32,000, and then quickly crawled right back up to 42,000. So you got something that's nebulous. We don't know exactly what it is, and we don't know where it came from exactly. And it's worth $42,000 per Bitcoin. When it was at 50,000, the market cap of this curious entity was $1 trillion. That's trillion with a capital T. Remember, the US economy is like 20 trillion a year or something. So you got this entity that is worth 5% of the United States gross domestic product. It's amazing. Peter Thiel has said it's a weapon, it's a financial weapon for the Chinese. Who knows? Nobody really knows. There's this whole legend around Satoshi, and the boys call it stacking sats and all this fun stuff. But the show today is around blockchain, which again underpins Bitcoin, but has many other applications. And there's some really interesting things happening with blockchain around products and around shipping. For example, we hear a story about wines and protecting fine wine, but it's also used around the world to track fishing, for example, to track crops, to track just about anything. And if you think about the value of this distributed ledger, well, it's cool because you can see what's in there. You can see what's going on, and it's immutable. I think that's the key characteristic of blockchain that matters the most, is it's immutable. It cannot be hurt. It cannot be changed, right? So at least some people say it can. My research tells me it cannot. But it's very interesting stuff. Now, the blockchain that underpins Bitcoin is very, very slow, and that's because it's trying to persist every transaction across 10,000 nodes. That's why they talk about how in Iceland, I don't know, they talk about the carbon footprint. Apparently, that's why Elon Musk said he pulled out. Who knows if that's the exact reason or not. But nonetheless, Michael Saylor, the guy from MicroStrategy, apparently owns 11,000 Bitcoins. That's a lot of money invested in Bitcoin. It's a pretty interesting investment. What's his name? Diamond from Chase Bank has said all sorts of nefarious things, if you will, about Bitcoin, says it's a big scam. Who knows? I think they're very concerned. Quite frankly, I look at Bitcoin as a gigantic hedge to fiat currency. Fiat currency is money that we just print, right? So if the US runs out of money, we just print more. We've been printing a lot of money lately. And of course, the ultimate result of that is inflation. But again, we're talking today more about blockchain, not so much about Bitcoin, but that's where it came from. And it's a very powerful technology, but it's still, to a certain degree, looking for its use cases. But with that, let's dive in with our guests. First of all, Oliver Oram, welcome to DM Radio. Tell us a bit about yourself and your company and what you're doing with blockchain.
Good day, Eric. Good to be on the show with you. So yeah, I'm Oliver, and I'm CEO of Chainvine and one of the founders there. We started a company a few years ago, and our first use case was around fine wine and the movement of fine wine. Today, we're working with all of the world of wine. So we basically began to mesh blockchain technology with IoT And what we wanted to do was create intelligent goods that could carry data and connect with one another. And the idea was the strong points that you've just pointed out around blockchain is why we're doing that. It's an immutable track record of what's happened and where the wine has been once we add it to the IoT. It's sort of like saying, we're going to show you this good and we're going to tell you the health, wealth, and happiness of it, who it's with, where it's been, and how it's feeling. And we're using technology to actually record this story. So I differentiate between intelligent contracts and smart contracts. So for example, I believe that these contracts carry intelligence, they gather intelligence as they move along. And what we're doing is making sure that intelligence that is recorded is not changed by anyone in that supply chain. Now, around about 2 years ago, we showed this technology to the UK government. And basically they said, that's pretty cool. So you're telling us you can move a good around, and before it even reaches our ports, we can have all the data about that good. We wouldn't need any more paper declarations in the future. Now, paper declarations, you think about it, there's about 15 billion pounds worth of declarations a year between the EU and the UK. And the paperwork is massive. So not only is this a better way of doing things, you've got data integrity there, but you're actually getting rid of the economic and environmental unsustainability around moving goods, right? You can't be carrying around a tree trunk to move goods across a border. It's absolutely insane. Yeah. And that's where we are now. And it's a long story. You know, it's not easy just to say, hey, I've got blockchain for you, it's going to solve all your problems, because it doesn't. You've got to have a solution. You've got to know the pain points. And that's really where we are. We're solving painful issues in the industry. So from actually managing your data in a really good way, you get extremely good compliance data. And that is your regulatory standards and everything met using a simple solution.
See, this is such an excellent point. That's a great explanation. And it's a great point you're making about, number one, saving on all the waste of paper, but number two, the integrity of the data. And number three, being able to track. And then guess what? You've got your audit trail and it's electronic. So you just run the freaking report instead of having to pore over all these documents, which, let's be honest, are very easy to forge, or very easy to lose, to misplace, to mishandle. You know, this stuff, paper documents are very easily ruined. They're very easily lost. They're easily forged. So when you talk about the immutability of the blockchain, this gets very interesting. Now, what blockchain are you actually pinning to? Is it Ethereum? Is it something else? What are you actually using?
So we've used a mixture of different protocols. We're pretty open because of the technology is still fairly new in the enterprise world. We've used Fabric, open source. We've used Corda open source. We used Ethereum. We even used Bitcoin in the beginning, if you remember the old colored coins, and using them. But obviously that got a bit expensive. Hodl, if you like. So yeah, there's quite a lot of different protocols coming out. The idea of the platform solution from our point of view was we wanted to concentrate on building solutions on the technology, not the technology itself. We believe in the technology. We had to build a platform. And the reason why we built a platform was because actually we wanted it to be completely democratic, the technology and how people engage with it. So we wanted the smallest SME in the world, the smallest vineyard or farmer, to be able to use next generation technology at a kind of Netflix scale. Like, hey, you can subscribe for £7 a month to get your declarations done. And actually, you know what? That's 66% of the economy when you concentrate on the small and medium guys. And that's really where the sweet spot is. In fact, we had one of the big tech companies in when we pitched this, and they said, we don't do SMEs. Now they regret that, because that's about 66% of the economy you're trying to help.
Yeah, that's another excellent point, right? The big guys, and we can sort of wax political here a little bit. There is a reason why government agencies typically like to have fewer banks, for example. Fewer throats to choke is kind of what it boils down to. And those unwashed masses, if you will, are rather unwieldy. And so it's hard to get at them and to do things. But it seems to me with the solution that you put together here, again, you're providing genuine clarity around the movement of goods and what these goods are and where they've been and what they're doing, what's going on with them. That's audit ability. And also if there's, God forbid, some disease, like in of course farming with cabbage or whatever, you can get salmonella, you can get all sorts of things. And if you can trace it back to where it came from, then you can mitigate the damage on the recalls, right?
Yeah. It's I think just by its nature, once you begin to build out your ecosystems and begin to get more players in a certain sector like we've done, the exporters being able to share their data with the importers in a kind of next generation just-in-time system. Really, it's so cool, and you're democratizing. You're giving them a sort of democratic way to share their data. We did actually a phishing job once, and one of the ministers in this country that we were helping sort of said, I don't want to use that because I don't want them in my database or something like that. And I said, you're not really understanding it. I said, and by the way, how many bits of paper have you given to that ministry? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, how much data do you think you're sharing today? He goes, none. I said, but you give paperwork out every day. I said, who's reading your paperwork? He says, I don't know. I'll ask my assistant. Then his assistant calls someone else and he goes, hey, boss, actually, we don't know. So I said, there's another benefit there, right? So it's not 99, it's not 100%. Nothing's a silver bullet. But it's so much better than paper because you can actually see who's accessing and wants to access your data, and you can give them permission to do that. And it's sharing data in such an advanced and next generation way that it blows people's mind. But when they begin to grasp it, they're like, Jesus, you can save me a lot of cash, and actually you're doing me, you're lowering the barrier to entry for markets. So I call it reducing the cost of trust. It won't replace it, but it will drive down the cost of compliance and regulations and thereby reduce those barriers to markets for exporters and importers.
Well, and this is a perfect example. And Oliver, stick around for the roundtable. I'm going to bring Mance Harmon into the conversation now, but that is an excellent, I would call it an exquisite example for the value of blockchain. And you made so many good points. We should probably unpack a bit of that. One of which is, when you have this centralized repository to which all appropriate parties have access at appropriate access levels, then again, you're working around the same source of truth. And now you can vet it, you can analyze it, you can report on it, you can go back and understand it. Whereas in a paper-based world, there's no chance. I had a guy on DM Radio 12 or 13 years ago, I'll never forget this guy, Chuck Nice was his name. We were actually talking about the subprime crash. He made a quote that I think is kind of funny in this context. We were talking about whether or not better governance, data governance, and IT governance in general could have helped avoid the subprime crash in the US. And he joked, he basically said no. He says, who would have thought that lending money to people who couldn't afford it was a bad idea? Right? It's just obvious the shortfalls in these systems, right? And one of the other quotes he made was, if an insurance company wants to hide something in their balance sheet, you're not going to find it, is how he described it. And the point is that these financials are so incredibly complex. Now, these days with machine learning and artificial intelligence, I think we are coming up to a point where we'll be able to scan through these just troves of information and find certain patterns. And then, as you guys probably know, once you find a bad actor and you can identify the profile of that bad actor, then you can rescan the system and see, all right, who else is doing that? And that's when you kind of get somewhere. But short of that, the old systems are just terribly prone to inefficiencies, tremendous cost, in bad data quality. There's this long list. So it's a perfect use case for blockchain. But let's bring in Mance Harmon. Mance, tell us a bit about yourself and your company and what you folks are doing with this hashing idea.
Sure. Well, I'm Mance Harmon, founder and CEO of Hedera Hashgraph. My co-founder, Lehman Baird, invented this thing that we call the hash graph. It's essentially solving exactly the same problems that blockchain solves, except it's the next generation. The problem with blockchain, as you've already noted, is that sometimes it can be really slow. For example, on a global basis, Bitcoin, first generation technology, can only process 7 transactions per second.
Right.
Ethereum is at 15 transactions per second. And to scale, to be able to address global enterprise use cases, really high volume use cases, needs a fundamentally different approach. Hashgraph is one example of that different approach. When we started the company, we identified several things that were sort of preventing mainstream adoption of this new category of technology on a global scale. Performance and security were a couple of those, and stability and governance of this network, a global network that is enterprise grade and robust enough to be able to handle the kind of workloads that we hope and expect that we'll see from the mainstream. Hashgraph solved the tech side of that equation in terms of performance. As noted, Bitcoin and Ethereum are at 715 transactions per second today. In our global network, in the beta version of the network, we're currently processing 10,000 or capable of processing 10,000 transactions per second, and at a fraction of the cost. The cost per transaction is less than a penny, where
Wow.
with Ethereum, it can be measured in the tens or hundreds of dollars
Wow.
to give you a sense of scale. It's just the difference between a calculator and a computer. And if you think about the range of applications that you can address with a calculator versus the kinds of problems you can solve with a computer, that's the difference that we're talking about when we scale to that level. But we knew that tech was only half the equation. The other half was governance. And when creating the organization, we actually took inspiration from Visa. I read a book, literally, by a guy named Dee Hock. He's the founder of Visa. It was Bank Americard back then in the 60s. He wrote his story and outlined the governance model that they use that today is called Visa, marked it up, and we applied those same principles here to our situation. And that's resulted in a global council of enterprise organizations that are cross-industry. They're global, no single geography, equal representation across geographies. And finally, these organizations can't stay part of the governing council forever. They can serve for up to 2-3-year terms. These are the biggest companies in the world: Google, IBM, LG, Boeing, FIS, WorldPay, couple of global law firms, Denton and DLA Piper, some banks, Shinhan out of South Korea, Standard Bank out of South Africa, and Nomura out of Japan. This caliber of organization is what we're talking about. And they are Hedera. That's Hedera. The network is run by these organizations, and the result is that we have an enterprise grade solution that is capable of addressing the world's most important distributed applications.
Talking all things blockchain today with several experts. We've got Oliver Oram on the call, Mance Harmon, and coming up we'll have Sean Brem, who's in an undisclosed location on his cell phone. So it's kind of exciting. But the blockchain knows where he is. But anyway, back to Mance Harmon. You were talking about your approach and what Hedera is all about. And so it's sort of an alternative to blockchain, same kind of idea, right? But you're again trying to have this distributed ledger essentially that offers auditability and all those fun things, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah, I mean, it solves the same category of problems that blockchain solves, just far more efficiently, lower cost. It's made to be able to scale for the mainstream use cases that are coming, not just a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin is.
Yeah, it's very. And what kind of traction do you get? Like when you go out and talk to people, I mean, do you reference blockchain as an analogy or a metaphor, or do you just try to sell it on functionality?
You know, at this point, we're doing very little selling, and the market is coming to us. There was a time there in the earlier years where the market was primarily made up of small businesses, entrepreneurs, startups. We certainly do a lot of work with those organizations, that caliber or category, I should say, of network user. And enterprises were sitting on the sideline. That's changed. Enterprises are now moving into the space. They're coming to us. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, we logged 1.2 billion transactions. We surpassed Ethereum for having the most transactions of any of the public networks. We did that in 18 months compared to almost 5 years it took Ethereum to get there.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. It really is. And Ethereum, just for the benefit of the audience, that was a sort of collaboration of a number of different technology companies here in the States and maybe elsewhere. Can you explain the difference between the Bitcoin blockchain and Ethereum real quick?
Yeah, well, Bitcoin, of course, was the first one to use blockchain. It was created in 2008, and it's essentially, its original intended use was to be a currency, an alternative to fiat currencies. It's turned out that it's more appropriately used as a store of value. You could think of it sort of as digital gold in some sense. You would buy it and hold it. You don't really use it to buy and sell goods and services. Ethereum was an evolution on that, using the underlying technology, blockchain, the same type of tech, to be more general and make it possible for developers to build arbitrary applications. Any of the big platforms that are on the internet today that you can imagine that are sort of the tech giants, their products and services could be created in a decentralized form that provides transparency into the services that you don't get from a centralized organization. That was the vision behind Ethereum. The underlying tech was, again, sort of first generation technology. They're trying to move to newer generations of technology, and that's the value that Hashgraph brings. Is we're there today with the types of performance and security that I've described.
Yeah, no, that's great stuff. Well, let's bring in our final guest. Sean Brem has been waiting patiently in the wings. And Sean, you're doing some really interesting things around blockchain focused on the small to mid-sized businesses. Tell us a bit about that and about the conference that you're putting on.
Yeah, so I'm really, when I look at both the two gentlemen have spoken already, when I look at Oliver's perspective and I look at Mance's perspective, both of them are really highlighting really big issues. First of all, having come from big tech and big business, I come to understand that, that most of the GDP, greater than half the GDP of most countries comes from small business and mid markets. And the reason why they struggle is because the supply chains have got all these middlemen. And so that's item number one, is how do you disintermediate the middleman? And then number two is, everyone talks about data, but I've found, having been a big data scientist and worked in everything from DoD contracts all the way down to the consumer level, is most people fundamentally don't know the difference between data and information. In fact, most people use data and information interchangeably. Mm-hmm. And what I tell people, there's a huge difference between data. My flight back to the hill country of Texas outside of Austin is information now, because it has temporal meaning to me. I'm going to be getting on a flight soon, right? It has spatial value to it. And it has thematic value. So when you think about the most important information on the planet, that's the human identity. Big business would not run without human identity. Small businesses would not run. In fact, the global commerce that really powers the global e-commerce of the way is the human identity. But the difference is, the human identity is being bought and sold like a identity slave trade on a daily basis, where all of us on this call are living under this kind of surveillance capitalism, where we click on a button that says, oh, I agree to you, basically taking everything away from me, and then you can sell something to me as well. The idea behind CrowdPoint, yeah, right? The idea behind CrowdPoint was, look, your friends are stealing from you and your foes are stealing from you. If you look at the global trade market on cybersecurity Ventures said cybercrime is going to jump from $6 to $10 trillion in the next few years. That's greater than all the global drug trade combined, right? And so what's happening is, you got hackers stealing your identity, and you have big tech stealing your identity, and they're all trading it back and forth. In fact, it's so bad, Uber even paid the hackers to get the data. So what really powers the global economy is the human identity. So what if you build your entire blockchain based upon what's really powering the global economy? And that's the human identity, right? And if you can create this decentralized ID, then you can do some really cool things. One, Mance is 100% right. The blockchain is moving slow, and I think most Americans and most UK and other people, I recently did a show, you should check it out on YouTube, where I had Finland, Sweden, and the whole world talking about this. And that is that the blockchain is really more important than cryptocurrency. The cryptocurrency was an interesting implementation, but it doesn't based on real transactional volume. So it would make Mance's argument and what Oliver's argument is really interesting. It's based on they're focused on transactions. And then what we'll see eventually is we'll see cryptocurrency that will be based on the transactional volume that's going through a blockchain, and will be based on the contract value. So we decided to kind of leap ahead. So we said, well, we're really good at big data. So how do we create an interface to massive amounts of big data and create a intersection with this distributed ledger? Well, the problem with the distributed ledgers today is that, as Mance identified, they can be slow because they're 1 megabyte requirements. Well, one of the things that we learned in my past in the Department of Defense is to create alternate representations of data. Why don't you represent an image as a pattern? And why don't you cipher that pattern? And now all of a sudden you can lose large amounts of imagery in very low bandwidth environments, and you can represent that in a way that has a unique pattern that can be randomly accessed in real time. Well, now all of a sudden you're looking at a comparison between traditional blockchain versus let's call it an alternate representation within a block. Now you can get 20 megabytes of data in a block that can be randomly accessed with transactional volumes that are mind-boggling. And so that's what we've been doing. We've been basically building a blockchain that will only require about 1,500 people to run it worldwide. It leverages the power of alternate representation of large amounts of data with unique hashes back out into a big data environment. So you can leverage the power of the artificial intelligence being run by that. So the combination of big data, artificial intelligence, and an alternate representation of data on the blockchain is what we've been building. And the difference is we're focusing on empowering the little guy and creating a taxonomy that really kind of mimics what we see today in the markets. One of the values that I loved about Oliver is you think about Oliver's literally moving things through the supply chain. He's giving greater visibility on the transactional volume that's happening with a micro total addressable market that's happening that real time. Think about what he's just done. What he's just done is you look at the global stock markets today, trade on speculating on what somebody might say in 90 days with their 10K. Well, when you talk about transparency, Oliver is taking it on headstrong, and where we're going the exact same way, which is, hey, we recognize that you've got to build to a technology concept, but not be technology bigots and only going one way. You've got to focus on optimizing the transaction and then visualizing the transaction all the way from the raw material provider to the supplier, to the manufacturer, to the distributor, the reseller, the salesperson, and then the actual consumer. When you can kind of do those things both horizontally across the supply chain and vertically into different ecosystems, now what you're doing is you start getting some really cool Aleu gold rat stuff on theory of constraints, and you start minimizing queue time. And wow, I tell you, here's a great idea. Why don't we track the transactional volume of the real assets moving through real environments and doing it in a far more efficient way? Hold on to your hat, Wall Street, because that's what's coming.
This is excellent commentary, and I think I can be brave and bold and throw out some provocative thoughts to this group, because I think you guys are all focused on the same kinds of concepts. But I wrote an article probably 4 years ago now, or 3 years ago, on LinkedIn about what I call outsider trading. And what I'm talking about is the amount of data that companies now have on people. I'm talking real world transactional data. There are companies that buy exhaust data from credit cards, and they buy it at scale, and they know they can walk into a restaurant, for example, and say, oh, I know that you guys did $48,650 of business last month. And you're like, well, how on earth do you know that? Because we have the credit card data to show it. And they know that Oliver spent $32 and Mance spent $27 on this date. All this information is out there to use. So put this in the context of the stock market and what you're talking about, speculation, right? I would submit to you, and I know there's another company that sells, this guy joked he sells the most expensive Excel spreadsheet in the world to Goldman Sachs every month. And it's details of how much money big box vendors are making from the credit card data. Now, they don't have cash, but who pays with cash anymore? And they don't have debit cards. I think it's just the credit card information. But the point is this: if you know which companies are going to meet or beat market estimates, then you know who to bet on, right? Imagine if you're playing poker with 3 of your friends, and the rules are that you can see all their cards, but they can't see anyone else's cards, right? Well, if you lose, you're an idiot, I think is the bottom line. So folks, great show today. Send me an email, info@dmrated.biz. Thanks again. We'll talk to you next time.